Chess.
Chess. 20 years ago, we see the most intense chess competition happening between a gifted prodigy child and an old grandmaster. The child Welkins has been a very, very strong contender, but ends up losing in the finals to this old grandmaster who we at the end of this sequence see get choked out in the bathroom.
But in present day, many people are excitedly gathering for another chess tournament. The main character is Tanya, who is a chess up and coming prodigy who is said to be the next best chess player. But her best friend, Alicia, is also a wonderful chess player. And she has a crush on her big rival, Dylan. And there's also a grumpy old veteran named Frank and a dazzlingly famous chess superstar named Alex.
Tanya and Alicia go over to talk to Dylan, who is 1 year ahead of them, so like a little bit cooler in their eyes. And Tanya is totally fumbling the bag with Dylan before the star chess player comes over and wows them all and just gets them talking about their ideology of chess.
Mm-hmm. They decide to have a late night tournament before the real tournament to see who is the best chess player.
So there were 5 of them participating in this late night tournament, which is taking place in the basement of this convention center slash hotel that they're all in. And they are using kind of like stolen equipment from the tournament itself that they intend to return at the end.
Until Alex, who is practicing his chess singing, suddenly you hear a chess scream, and now there are 4 of them.
Dum, bum, bum, bum. Until Frank, the old one who is not really happy about the taking of these equipments, starts to bring some boards back up to the convention center, but has a pawn stuffed down his throat.
So there were 3 of them until Alicia discovers Alex's body and is horrified. She sees the slasher sneaking up on Tanya, but decides that, like in chess where you would sacrifice a bishop to save the queen, right now she's going to run in at a diagonal and get slashed by a chessboard, allowing Tanya to escape.
So there were 2 of them until Dylan, who has been relatively dismissive of the fact that anybody has been going missing, discovers one of these bloody chessboards and it engages in a face-off with the slasher where the slasher has this contraption that has one of these chess timers connected to a bomb, and both of them are subsequently like hitting the chess timer with the same pace of an actual chess match.
So now there's only one of them. Tanya goes to hide and discovers a storage room in the basement with a checkered floor. Set up on it are giant chess pieces, and enter the slasher, who says that he will that he wants to show that he truly is the best chess player and deserves the title, and wants to show it to her by beating her.
Tanya while initially thrown off, has been saying the whole weekend that she just wants to play chess and doesn't like all this drama of famous chess players and tournaments and conventions. And that was the whole point of this basement play anyways. So they get into it until she puts him in the same losing position that the turn before he gets checkmated from 20 years ago.
The slasher is very freaked out by this. But he's spent so long studying the board that he actually knows the right response move and makes it. But it turns out that Tanya was not playing to win the game, but to position her body closer to the door. And she runs for it up the stairs.
Having resigned, Tanya is now running up to get basically out of this convention hall, just to a car to hitchhike anywhere. But she runs to the entrance and slips because scattered around the whole lobby of the hotel are newspaper clippings from the day that the slasher child prodigy lost.
The doors to the outside of the hotel are locked. The security cameras have clearly been broken. Upstairs, you hear the pounding of guests who are trapped in the room. The slasher walks out towards her and says, "Checkmate."
The slasher raises the large queen-shaped knife that he has been killing people with to Tanya. And starts to bring it down on her until she's used up just enough of the time, and the alarm bell for the morning goes off, and the first light of sun comes through the doors, and like the doors break open, and tons of like reporters and people ready to start the tournament enter into the space and see him standing there over her with the bloody queen. He is now subdued because there are many people there. We cut to 1 year later. The tournament has been rescheduled because of all of the murders, and Tanya is playing. She gets into the same chess position that was so important in the basement. And she looks into the crowd that is watching her and sees the face of the slasher.
Mm-hmm.
The end?
Or
Question mark?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Muprov Musings. This is episode 58. I'm one of your hosts, Hal Munger, and joining me now on the line is your brilliant host, Julian Bernardo.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I accept that title because it is true. And I think that we're doing something maybe that requires more brilliance today. I think today's episode is a little bit more of a kind of brainy look at some of these plot structures.
Yeah, you've seen an episode titled Reverse Engineering before. We did this with Shakespeare shows, and I think we're going to do it in a slightly better way than we did that time. But the basic principle that we do is we go through a canon of what we think are existing movies, extract from their plot structures the things that are in common to them, or at least to like 3 or 4 of them, and then use that to create a blueprint of what is generally true across all these narratives and how they're structured. So, Julian, what are our 5 movies that we are looking at?
Yeah, so we have talked about a few of these, but the 5 that we really dove into to try to extract things from are Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Scream, and Friday the 13th.
And how we decided to approach this whole project was that we started out by making a heat map of each of these films. And basically, red heat is when a scene that involves someone getting slashed or killed. Orange heat is a scene that involves someone escaping from the slasher. Yellow heat is a scene that involves some sort of scare or jump scare kind of thing that's being done by a friend. And white or just no heat blank is just sort of a random plot device platforming scene.
Yeah, so I think that while this breakdown for slasher movies makes sense, because like the killing and the intensity of it is maybe the key feature, but overall, I love doing these reverse engineering things because so much of improv is just like playing with genres, and this is like a nice way to if you do this, I guess the argument is you should feel very like confident that a lot of the tropes and the rhythm of it is like already in your bones.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to use this heat map to build up what we're going to have as sort of a generic plot structure that you can loosely follow in your slasher movies. And we'll kind of see what things are different across them and what are the similar. So Nightmare on Elm Street's heat map starts out with a little bit of orange, a chase scene to get you heated and ready into the thing. Then you wake up and do some platform, and then they have a red first kill. After that, there's a fair amount of platform, followed by a ton of orange, a lot of scenes where the main character is escaping, then another kill, then more orange and some more platform. Or at this point, it's not really platform, but I would say backstory, which is kind of common. A lot of them have this sort of last act backstory to them. And then there's another kill. And then there's a little more orange, and then there's another kill, and then there's a final scene with a jump scare. So the kills are pretty evenly spaced out, and there's a lot of chasing around the beginning. The beginning looks pretty orange, and the end looks pretty red, but honestly, the red kind of punctuates it evenly. What about Halloween?
Halloween starts off with a red killing scene at the top. This is like 30, 40 years in the past or something, showing like the origin of Michael Myers. We get a couple orange scenes back in the present when it's revealed that he is like escaped from the asylum where they have been keeping him. And then we get some sort of backstory scenes introducing us to the main characters, the babysitters in the town where Michael Myers is from. And then in the middle, we get a lot of this red as the main babysitter, Laurie's friends, are all basically killed by Michael Myers. After they are all killed, we get a pretty big sequence of orange, which is interspersed with some like non-intense scenes, but mainly Michael Myers is like chasing Laurie throughout different houses, and she's trying to get away, and there's a lot of close encounters. And we end with a big red scene as the doctor / detective who has been hunting Michael Myers comes in and shoots him and vanquishes him, at least for now.
What about Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think, is interesting because it has a very concentrated version of what we're generally talking about here. We open with a like deep orange / red, like kind of corpse sculpture that's been made in the graveyard. But then we cut to just the 5 teens who make up the main characters chatting real funnily in the car. Eventually, there's a little bit of orange as they pick up a hitchhiker who sort of like cuts one of them. But then we go back to kind of no action until they venture over to a nearby house, and in a sequence of like 4 or 5 scenes, pretty much all but one of the main characters is killed. So we have this huge mountain of red in the middle. But that's only about halfway through the movie. The kind of final half is the remaining survivor sort of escaping Leatherface and his associated acts until the final scene.
That sounds pretty similar to Friday the 13th heat map, with the only troll thing about Friday the 13th being that there are 10 slashes, a giant cast of characters being slashed. But It opens up with a slash that happened many years ago, uh, gets to the present. Uh, Similar to Nightmare on Elm Street, we have a protag swap. So we enter, we meet someone, we're kind of following along with them, and then that person gets slashed as another kind of opening slash. Then there's a lot of yellow of people pretending to scare each other, not actually dying. And then night falls and it's like slash 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 slash, and like 7 people get killed back to back, until finally it's just the protagonist left. But then there's still another like 30 minutes of the movie that's all orange, where this protagonist is fighting off Mrs. Voorhees just forever. There's a red where she beheads Mrs. Voorhees, and then there's this sort of calm after scene. I haven't told you about this, so I'll just tell you it's on the podcast. This movie was much less scary than Nightmare on Elm Street, except this one moment where this calm music starts playing. The police car comes in. She's floating out in the center of the lake on the canoe. And then the whole time the slasher has been Jason's mom, who's mad because her son drowned. And she has now been beheaded, and so she's not a threat anymore. And the policemen start yelling to her, and the main character slowly wakes up, and she starts to move towards them. And then all of a sudden, there's a crazy jump scare where this corpse Jason jumps out of the lake and strangles her. And then she wakes up in the hospital, and she's all right. And she's asking what happened in this really creepy way. And she's like, what about the boy? And they're like, what boy? There wasn't a boy. And she's like, the boy in the lake. And they're like, there wasn't any boy in the lake. You just fell out of the boat. And she's like, that means the boy's still out there. And it cuts back to the lake, and you see these little bubbles just coming up beneath the lake surface, and you know that he's about to start killing. But it's really memorable.
That's great. That a lot of like maybe a Halloween more than Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but you know, there's this scene at the end where it's like, okay, there's more to happen. Let's set up a sequel. But that one sounds like one of the most like ham-fisted, or you know, more kindly like deliberate versions of these.
It got me so hard. I was so because again, she was dead, and I knew that Jason wasn't in the first movie. It was this calm thing where like the police come and you see like this music playing, and so the sudden change from the quiet music into the crazy, you're not expecting anyone to come out of the water. Oh my god,
it's worth it though for Jason. I mean, Jason's the guy. Jason might be the most iconic.
Okay, well, what about the last one? What's Scream Seat Map?
Scream Seat Map is a little different than some of these in that the red is a bit more equally distributed. We do have the same thing where at the top we maybe think that Drew Barrymore is playing the main character, but she is just the opening kill. And then we have like a decent chunk of no action / setup as we start following other high schoolers who went to the same high school as Drew Barrymore's character. And eventually the main character, who has this kind of like tragic backstory, is attacked by Ghostface, the killer, but kind of saved by her boyfriend. So a bit of an origin scene. And then, the whole town is investigating this murder. So the principal dies. We kind of don't know who it is. That's another red. But then the high schoolers are still kind of chill. They're having a party. And during the party, someone gets killed, but most people don't know. So we're kind of cutting hard between people getting killed and people being oblivious and not really doing anything about it. Sydney and her boyfriend have a bit of a reconciliation, and then Ghostface attacks them, kills some more people. The big kind of reveal toward the end is that like Ghostface is 2 people, one of whom is Sydney's boyfriend. And then at the end, Sydney kills both of them. So more equally distributed red. And I think that in general, the structure of Scream is maybe more oriented around drip feeding these kills because the mystery is who the slasher is, rather than a lot of these other ones. They're kind of just like a nameless monster.
Mm-hmm. And so right away, you kind of see these two buckets. One of them is the Scream and Nightmare on Elm Street bucket, and the other one is the Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Friday the 13th bucket. And we're going to kind of break it up into two structures, one of which is the structure that we used to do when we were improvising slasher, and the other one was the structure that we've seen in a lot of these movies. So we could call it maybe the movie structure and the improv structure. But I would say the big difference between the two subdivisions are two of these movies have 5 spaced out kills between characters who are developed that we see over time, who are kind of important. And the movie is based in these sort of like 5 or 6 kills. Whereas the other 3 films, they have, just a while of build up and then somewhere between 4 and 10 random side characters are slashed in quick succession. And then there's a long chase scene with the remaining protagonists. So it almost feels like a duoprov show where like half the show is just following this protagonist and the slasher.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can kind of already see why the improvised structure might differ from this, given considerations about who's going to be on stage, splitting time like that. And also just the practicality of, I think that the movies benefit a lot from just the visual intrigue of a kill that is harder to do on stage.
But for the sake of this, let's say you're in an ensemble who's okay with unequal stage time, who is doing 3 slashers and is interested in the concept of everyone getting the chance to be a protagonist, everyone getting the chance to be a killer, and what that would look like. In these actual movies, let's kind of break down what the structure is that's common across all of them.
Yeah.
So I think all of them have a burst of orange or red at the start.
Yeah, it's often hard to do. It makes me think of doing an opening song in an improvised musical where it is a little bit of like a big hit that you have to make at the top. But it is just happening in all of these movies that there's some initial kind of blood and gore to keep the audience interested. And I think that this is pretty improvisable as long as you don't. I think that it's just something that is a little bit unintuitive when you're doing narrative improv to do something like a cold open kill.
Yeah, it definitely is something that is worth practicing. But I will say when we ran slashers in person, we tried this and found that it wasn't that successful because so much of the suspense and building is what makes the slasher ultimately scary.
Mm-hmm.
It actually is nice to sort of marinate your slasher and build them up over time rather than just to be like, what's the first idea that I have when I come out on stage? And I think that the shows that didn't have this ended up being stronger. And so maybe you could replace this by like the finding of a body or something else that doesn't quite have the slasher on stage yet, because there is something kind of beautiful about the whole rest of the cast getting to kind of endow the slasher a bit before you see the slasher on stage. And it takes some of the weight off their shoulders to come in at 100%.
Yeah. I think a good movie blueprint for this is maybe Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where we open with this just like disgusting like corpse sculpture thing that, assumedly has been created by Leatherface, but we don't see any of the killers at this point. And the characters don't even interact with it. It's kind of just this like visual moment as we're just like looking at this really gross human sculpture. So I like it. I like this kind of stuff because I think it does set the tone in a big way. And I do think that the comparison to opening songs in musicals is good in that it gets people out of the waffling zone and like gives the audience like something big at the top that can also be used by the players to affect how they're going to play in following scenes. But I totally agree that it kills a lot of the tension if we see the slasher kill someone in the first scene.
And I'm famously opposed to opening numbers in musicals. I feel like it's funny in New York, the trend is to do an opening number that has literally nothing to do with the show, is how they've worked around this. Like they'll introduce characters in the opening number who you never see again. And it's kind of that feels even more dissatisfying to me. But I think that what people realize is it's difficult to introduce characters at the same time as singing. So you get this awesome bang of like, whoa, we're starting off singing, but then you have to live with all of these things that you established to hit a rhyme or something like that, and people didn't quite hear because it was sung at a high note or whatever. And I think it's a very similar thing with this, where practice it, try it, see if you can get these scenes to be successful, and if you can't, better to have well-established characters and a scary slasher than to have some scary opening scene.
Yeah. I think this is one of those. Yeah, maybe you could call it like an advanced technique or something. Just something that you should do if you can do it, but is not necessary to the format at all.
And then two of our movies have at least both the ones that I watched had a saucy protag switch, which I'd never seen before. We'd never done that in improv before. But they platform what feels like a protagonist for 3 scenes, and then in the 3rd scene or 4th scene, that person is killed. And that kill comes a while before any of the other kills. And I think that the reason that they do it is because, your first and last things are always something you want to be memorable. So the idea is how you make the first kill really disorienting to the audience is to actually kill off the person who seems to be the lead character.
Yeah. This sort of happens in Scream, and not exactly, but something sort of similar in Texas Chainsaw. I think it's my sense that this is kind of hard to improvise. And yeah, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts is that it's not hard to improvise, but it's very counterintuitive. It would be super disorienting if I wasn't aware of this, and then the slasher killed the protagonist in the 4th scene. I would be actively mad at the person playing the slasher. But now that I'm aware that it's a trope in a movie, I would be very interested to try it and have this kind of be it. It's a nice way to spread out who in the cast gets attention and who gets to play in scenes. I do think it's an interesting thing in that you have enough time in the remainder of the show to platform a second protagonist. So I don't know. It depends also. The movies are an hour and a half and that your show is probably an hour. So it's possible that you just don't have time to do this work twice. But I think it's an interesting thing that's worth being like, okay, let's try a run where we do it this way. And then if it works, be like, okay, well, let's just sort of decide every show whether whoever's playing the slasher can decide whether they want to come out and kill the existing protagonist or what.
Yeah. This is also a good thing to practice and get on the same page about, I think. If we were to run this together right now, I would have some skepticism towards this, but be happy to explore it.
What about the warning?
The warning is very common in these. I think happens in at least 2 out of the 3 that I watched. And there's typically some older, wiser figure compared to the typically younger protagonist who warns the protagonist and their group of friends maybe to not go somewhere that they shouldn't go, or not trifle with something that ended a long time ago. So it's I made this comparison before, but I'll reiterate it that it really feels like the opposite of the call to adventure in like the hero's journey, where we get this demarcation in the plot that something big is about to happen, but this entirely rests on the protagonist choosing to do something that is maybe they shouldn't do, or maybe there's reason that they wouldn't do.
And to round out the data set, half of my movies had it, so it's overall it's an 80% of the movies had. So I'm gonna give a warning. This is also a great, if you played the improv game Here Comes Charlie, this is what I'm talking about the slasher starting to be identified, where it's really fun to be a character to give us a warning. It specifically is like, it was so strange. We found the bodies drowned, but there was no water nearby, or whatever you say. But you can give these gifts to the slasher where then that person has to embody that and make that happen, and maybe they carry around a bottle of water that they force down people's throat. I don't know what, but
Yeah, it's a fun thing. I think that one of the big things that it does is it keeps the tense tone going. Because typically, whether or not you had like the cold open kill, I feel like the early scenes with the protagonist and their friends or whatever are typically a bit lighter. And I feel like the warning is when we first kick back into oh yeah, this is a movie about people dying. And it's also a knob that you can turn about how much the wise figure warns the protagonist. In some of these movies, it's pretty deliberate. It's like, no, like don't go there, you will die, because yeah, people are drowning with no water. And then some of them, it's played more ambiguously of, oh, just don't go messing around there. That's it's not good luck.
The next thing that is in almost all these movies is the yellow. Sometimes the opening platform, like Julian was talking about, also is full of yellow. Like in Nightmare on Elm Street, it's yellow the whole time. There's never any just blank. But this is where the characters start trying to scare each other. In Nightmare on Elm Street, they're like prank calling someone's mom with horrifying screams, and someone jumps out of the bushes to scare them, and X, Y, or Z. In the Friday the 13th, they kill a snake with a machete, and one guy pretends to drown in the lake and has people jump in to save him. And there's all this sort of fake death, so that when the real death starts happening, people don't quite believe what's going on.
Yeah, it's such a trope in these things for the friends to be scaring each other, and they serve as like kind of real scares for the audience, at least for a moment, but they're fleeting, and that once you realize what's happening, there's no more tension because you realize it's just like a silly thing happening. So I like these. In Halloween, it's a little bit of a mix of maybe like real yellow versus like fake yellow, in that Michael Myers is kind of like stalking our main character, but like from a very far distance, and it's like unclear like if she's even like imagining it or whatever. Like there's just like these little scenes where she's like looking over and she sees like 2 blocks down his face. So you can play with this in terms of like how intense these early scares are. It's my intuition, I think, that for the improv, for improv, it might be better to keep these scares like more fleeting and more like playful in tone. I think that there are just less of these kind of visual affordances, such that I think playing with the arc of the tension and the fear is more important for the improv. So being more deliberate about not doing anything too intense at this part of the show feels big for me.
Well, these are also jump scares. Like this is like you actually sneak up behind your fellow improviser and scream suddenly, and that kind of thing. So it can be very playful and delightful as long as all of you are on board with this. It puts you in this shocking state already. Is one way of saying this. And up until now, I would say that the improv structure and the movie structure have been pretty convergent. The difference is if you want to go epic, with the movie structure, is you might have the switch pro tags, you might have the cold open kill. But up until now, they're pretty similar. And then I think where they start to diverge is that the improv one, the platform goes longer, maybe is one way of saying that. But let's keep on going with the movie structure.
Yeah.
And that one really has this belly of kills in the center.
Mm-hmm. So in the middle of many of these movies, there are like 4 or more back-to-back scenes where like someone is dying, someone is getting killed by the slasher. And it's at least the ones that I watched, I would say it tends to be the people that we've been introduced to as like friends of the protagonist, but have not really like gotten super, they're not like characters that we care about a ton, but they are also maybe the only like characters that are in the show. And that in the movies that I watched, at least, there tends to be a bigger discrepancy between how developed the protagonist is and how developed these like belly of the beast kills, belly of the beast victims are.
Yeah, that was true for me too. I was people that we didn't care as much being killed in different ways, and the point is that they were gory. I was kind of interested to notice that a lot of times they were kind of fast and they weren't even that epic as kills, which kind of was disappointing to me. As an improviser, I liked the Nightmare on Elm Street. Each kill is extremely unique in a very improv-y way. Whereas in Friday the 13th, like 10 people get killed with like either a knife or an axe or an arrow or just like very normal. In Friday the 13th. But after these people all get killed off, what I found fascinating about the movies is that there are two things that happen to the heat map. Either it goes cold and it suddenly becomes a lot of like white, yellow, orange kind of stuff, where you're getting backstory and you're like, suddenly I'm learning that Freddy Krueger was this guy who existed and kidnapped kids and was burned and like all this kind of random stuff that you're learning through conversation. Mm-hmm. Or it's like entirely orange and there are like 10 scenes back to back where the character escapes from the slasher.
Yeah, so by the end of these Belly of the Beast kills, it is typically only really the protagonist and some of the exterior characters who are left. And in the ones that I watched, Scream doesn't exactly fit this, but the other two really are focused on this like showdown, like extended sequence of escapes and attacks between the protagonist and the slasher at this point. I think what's your it feels like the Friday or the Nightmare on Elm Street structure that you kind of described feels a little bit like improv shows that just happened in my head, and that like you often get yourself into a little bit of a ditch and then you have to explain who exactly these characters are, why this is happening. But I think I tend to prefer at least watching these like extended protag slasher drama.
Yeah, I'm also fascinated by the extended protag slasher drama. We've never done this in an improv setting before. We're excited to try it on the podcast. But the reason that we haven't done this is because it distributes stage time unequally among the players. So you can obviously get around that by deciding before each show, like, you know, on Tuesday night, this person's going to be the protag, this person's going to be the slasher. On Thursday night, this person's going to be protag, this, you know, so everyone gets even. Or we love physical improvisers on this podcast. And I think it would be very cool in Friday the 13th, after people start getting killed, their bodies turn up everywhere. And as she's being chased around, there are just these bodies everywhere. And especially if you're using blood and stuff like that, I think having the dead people who will look more disturbing, having them play the set and the doors and the things that people hide behind, I think that would really elevate this idea of being chased around.
I think that really clicks in that the way to keep this like final sequence of showdowns interesting is to put the protagonist and slasher in, by my read, just basically different physical scenarios, like the slasher is trying to get through a door, the slasher is trying to climb a tree, all these kinds of things. And it's hard to keep this interesting with purely space objects. And I think that just imagining it, because you know, like Hal said, we haven't really done it. I think it would be so interesting to see on stage these like, you know, messed up, maybe bloody improvisers who are maybe stone faced and like serving the role of like a door that won't open and totally like not visible at all. Like the players on stage who are actual characters aren't clocking them as people at all. It's totally obstacles. But I think anything that you make a person in an improv scene is like bringing importance into it in the same way that you like snap into a thing on your body. And there's not a lot of dialogue in a lot of these movies at this part. It's a lot of action. And while I think that we probably both advocate for maybe possibly more dialogue at this stage, the way to get around that is to just have very visually interesting obstacles, which kind of have to be people.
I remember when we were doing the Lumiere with all the physical improvisers, it was extremely engaging as a player to, say, be moving through a cave that was made up of like 6 other improvisers' bodies.
Yeah.
And I think that it would increase the level of like physical fear if like when your leg got caught on something, it was actually being held by the hand of someone and you were actually tugging on it. And, you know, if you got stuck somewhere, having people actually holding you back and being able to push against them is a very powerful way to increase your ability to act. And the thing, we talked about combat and safety last time, but the more that you have real bodies interacting with each other and applying force to each other, the more careful you have to be and the more you have to practice. But I think you could do something really fascinating with physically embodying the set in the final scenes.
We're kind of building it out as we're talking here. But I love the concept, so I love to do it. But I think that one pitfall with this is the classic thing that people find it just somewhat funny when people are being objects, and embodying these objects without being humorous is a big thing. When we did a new play, I think the general tone of the show was enough to make the physical improvisers not like always just like funny things, but and hopefully at this point the tone has been set enough. But I don't know. I think that people watch slashers and are also like laughing a lot in a way where one way to take this is, people watch these movies and kind of like get a lot of joy out of it, so it's fine if they're doing it in the improv show. But where I'm kind of going is I think that some sort of like physical visual demarcation between living and dead characters is good. We talked about if there's like blood in the show, then that can be a good way to demarcate. But if there's not, putting like a transparent enough bag over someone's head, or even just popping in like like white eye contacts or something, anything to keep the visual of looking at these people like disturbing enough so as to not make them being a tree funny is just where my head's at.
Yeah, you want it to look like a mass of bodies and limbs and blood rather than a rather than a bunch of like people wearing their normal clothes pretending to be rocks. With this whole chase thing, that we got into this thing that we talked about last time, of this idea of this sort of slasher ordeal. In the movies that I saw, they tended to actually just have the protagonist kind of kill the slasher. Was that true of your movies as well?
Often there's like some kind of exterior help. I think like Halloween has this. It's a little maybe different than some of these others. Tell me if not, but where the whole movie there's this subplot of the doctor detective guy who's trying to find Michael Myers, and then it like the resolution of it is just he finally finds him, and now the two plots are reconciled. And in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's just like a guy driving a truck basically who comes and helps and ends up running over one of the slashers. So yes, largely it kind of just ends with one of the with the slasher dying ? Yeah.
Well, both of those sound less epic. The ones I saw were both, female protagonist manages to like, you know what? I'm actually, after all these big, strong guys have been killed, I'm just like going to be the one who takes the knife. In Friday the 13th, she just cuts off her head, just fully runs at her and beds her. And then Nightmare on Elm Street, she like lights him on fire. So it's a pretty visceral, but I think it gives more agency to the protagonist that you've been watching and care about if they're not just being saved by someone and they actually do something to overcome the person.
I think Scream does this well, just in thinking about the ordeal structure of it all. The big reveal at the end is that her boyfriend is one of the two slashers. And I mean, she straight up kills him and the other slasher. And I think that is probably a good blueprint in terms of writing one of these ordeals, because she does have one of these spiritual death scenes where she's like, oh my God, my boyfriend is the killer. What am I going to do? And then pulls it together.
Yeah, two of the shows that we watched have this mystery element to it. I
Mm-hmm.
thought that in Friday the 13th, it did not work at all.
Mm.
Uh, you have all the slasher scenes are just a camera panning to someone's face that they're like, oh, it's you. And then they get slashed or like it just, and that's part of why I was able to watch it. And it wasn't very scary. We tried this in our film noirs when we wanted to make mysteries happen. We tried this one-sided killing scene,
Mm.
where you would pretend to be killed, but you wouldn't see the person who was killing you.
Yeah.
Uh, and none of them ever delivered the gravitas that we were hoping. For maybe we weren't good enough actors to make it work, but I think it's a pretty tough. I think it's a pretty tough lift, in that if you want it to actually be a mystery, you could have the slasher wear a mask and have different people play the slasher in each of the scenes, or you could do duoprov and have the slasher played by one of the two people, but you still don't know which of the characters
Mm.
that person is who's doing the slashing, because all the characters are being played by the same people. But I would warn against the mystery where you're seeing this person be slashed, but you don't know. It's much better to, even if you're finding the bodies and not seeing the kills, I think that would be better than these one-sided.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. This is a pitfall, and yeah, if you're doing anything like an improvised slasher, be really deliberate about how you might do mystery because the things mentioned here are very important. Scream essentially does the first option that you described, like the ghost face costume is sufficiently covering up such that you can't really tell who it is, and the like mystery that's progressing the whole time is like uh uh you're with a different set of characters when the killer comes in, or the killer comes in and kills who, like, someone who might have been implied to be the killer in a previous scene. Uh but it's, I don't know, I think it is hard to achieve something like that in the, like, Scream does it, and Scream does it best of, oh, the way that all worked out and the mystery like still works out is that there were two killers. But since that's been done, I don't know how to really do it in a great way. I like the duoprov approach that you described because it uh yeah, there's not a lot of gymnastics that are needed.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do think that this show would work well as a duo prov show with some guests. Like,
Yeah.
if you had some people who were skilled improvisers who came to some of the practices and their job was just to get killed off in the middle, and then most of the show was two people practicing to play together. It does seem like at least half of the show is the protagonist going head to head with the slasher. Usually the slasher looks like they're dead and then gets back up and then is killed. Like, there's just this, and there's a moment where the character looks like they're about to die. There's this on and on and on of ordeal. You're dead, you're alive, you're dead, you're alive.
I'm really intrigued now in trying to distill the slasher versus protag sequences into improv and thinking about different ways to do that, because that does seem to be the one of the biggest features that I think we've both identified in these movies that we have not really contended with. And I think it's also interesting in the broader improv canon, because you think about duoprov, and a lot of duoprovs are funny because you have people who are really funny or observant. A lot of duoprovs are kind of interesting, like emotionally or like metaphorically, but again, because of like great dialogue and relationships and differing relationships that are created with the different characters. But this is doing something different because it's kind of like an action movie or something, where the intrigue of the duoprov at the end of this show is just basically the physical tension that's happening in each scene.
Mm-hmm. And breaking it into beats, I think it's usually slasher almost kills person, they escape. Mm-hmm. Person gets trapped, slasher approaches in a really scary way, maybe actually makes contact with them. Person maybe escapes and maybe does enough damage to the slasher to knock them out or make them think that they're defeated. Person like collapses, like thinks they're safe. Slasher comes back. Maybe in Nightmare on Elm Street, they go and kill her mom after you think that they're defeated. Maybe kill one more person, maybe they don't. And then person fully kills the slasher. And then there's this final little beat which both mine had. I don't know if yours had it, which is calm scene into final jump scare.
Hmm. I think maybe none of mine had calm scene into final jump scare. I think all of them have the big like payoff of the tension release of the final scene. But all the other beats that you just described, 100%. Uh, there's such a funny thing that, you know, as a trope you should play into, especially depending on how comedic you're going. But the protagonist like taking down the slasher in some way and being like, "We're done, killed the slasher, we're all good," and it's, you know, like 45 minutes left in the movie. Obviously, gonna come back.
Yeah. Well, okay, so if you didn't have this calm beat into final jump scare, did you at least have they might still be out there?
Yeah, I mean, for Halloween, the final shot is the place where his body was before is now empty. Texas Chainsaw, you actually Leatherface doesn't die at the end, so he just is still out there. We just see the protagonist escape. And Scream, no, not really. The killers kind of get killed. Although it's funny because Scream is the one where there's been like a million screams afterward.
Well, what is the end of Scream? Like, what's the final scene? How does it end?
Exact. I think that it is a more just like played for straight, calm scene of kind of reconciling with the protagonist reconciling with the remaining characters who are alive. Like there's this cop character who is kind of the biggest remaining character who is like now on the scene, and I think helps to some degree in the final act. So I think that Scream ends as a more straightforward version of like how you described like Friday the 13th ending.
Mm-hmm. From like a temporal map of the show, I feel like it often starts like 10 to 20 years earlier than maybe the whole second like or first quarter and or third of the show takes place over a day or a couple of days, and then the middle of the show takes place over like the evening or a couple of days depending on which of the scenes, and then the last third of the show takes place over the course of like an hour or like 20, like it's almost in live time. So it's sort of like the time frame is speeding up, speeding up, speeding up. But then the final scene is often like a few days later, like they're in the hospital, they're better, you think you're safe. And then in mine, there was one more jump scare that both times totally got me to jump out of my freaking skin because I thought I was done. But in Julian's, they didn't have that.
Yeah, I think the ones that I watched, like Texas Chainsaw and Halloween, are both like progenitors of the genre in a way that maybe that final flourish wasn't fully thought through. And Scream, I feel like, is also the progenitor of the next era of more like self-referential slashers, where again they might want to be playing the final scenes more straight on account of that. I think to think about temporal stuff, both Texas Chainsaw and Halloween all happen on the course of one day, except for in Halloween the flashback to the to 20 years earlier. It all takes place on Halloween.
Friday the 13th is also one day, but Elm Street, she canonically at one point goes, "I've been awake for 7 days. The record's 11, so I don't know how much time." You're like,
yeah. I tend to think that keeping it tighter temporally just like plays like on stage maybe a bit better, but that often, you know, you just need to take a day in between some scenes because of some, you know, you endowed that the party is tomorrow or you endowed this or that. So I don't think it matters for the first half, but I think that for the like final half of the show, it probably should be relatively tight temporally.
Yeah, and I think it's the temporal tightening of once the kills start happening, unless you're doing something weird like a Nightmare on Elm Street, and this is excluding the first kill. Once the like block of kills starts happening, it's basically in live time. So it's kind of an interesting thing where you can platform the characters as slowly as you want, but then that time starts happening. Let's quickly, we're running out of time on the episode, so let's quickly just talk about the improv structure that we'd used in the past that's more even for different characters. Um, and I think the big difference here is just the platform is much longer and you flesh out 5 characters, and it's still not totally even how fleshed out they are, but everyone, we would not see, because the slasher is going to get to be in all the scenes at the end, we would intentionally not see the slasher for the first like 30 to 35, 40 minutes of the show.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that we in general just do a lot more relationship and character building work for our characters than a lot of these movies. Like, even the protagonists in some of these movies are probably less developed than some of our kind of second or third kills. And so the first half of the show is a lot of seeing characters in different little combinations and some plot developing of they're going somewhere, and that leading to some light drama among them until the killing starts.
Yeah, and I think that we need to increase the emotional relevance of every kill because we don't have as much of the guttural blood spattering.
Yeah.
If you care about the character and there's more to them, it's easier to kill them. The platform could be scary. And then we would pretty heavily lean into the isolate trope, cut the phone lines, put them in a location. And then all our kills would pretty much be back to back, right? We didn't, maybe one escape spattered throughout there.
Yeah, we didn't have a lot of a escape, and yeah, once killing started, maybe it would be a scene in which a kill happens, maybe one scene with other characters where one of them doesn't die, but maybe no scenes with other characters. Maybe we just get this scene with other characters and then the slasher comes in. So we kind of have to tightly pack the kills since we start them so late as compared. But it, to me, it has the same rhythm as the middle of something like Halloween, or not Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where we kind of are just getting back to back to back kills. It just happens later in the show.
Yeah, and I think also each of the kill scenes is longer. It's, for us, it was less of this person's getting slashed and more of this person's getting like murdered slowly.
Yeah.
And usually there'd be like a fair amount of scene before that person got killed. It wasn't just like in Friday the 13th, someone would just walk in, they'd be like, "Who are you?" I'm dead. So the scenes were like 20 seconds. And then sometimes we would do an epilogue, like, where are they now? But a lot of times it would just end at the final moment when the slasher got killed.
Yeah. And I think we also tended to leave the interaction between the protagonist and the slasher to basically the end, and we don't really have we have like one meaty scene that's them interacting, and that like is one of the final scenes. Whereas like we described for a lot of these other films, like the slasher and final survivor are interacting a lot.
Yeah, like 10 scenes. But our meaty scene would often be 8 minutes, 10 minutes. And it would have a lot of dialogue and getting slowly trapped and like, how am I going to get out of the scene? I think of it very similar to the marriage scene in Shakespeare, where it's like, yeah, it's one scene, but you got a lot to navigate.
We pack a lot.
But I don't know, if it's your first time doing the slasher, I might start out trying the way we describe it. It's really fun. It's quite easy, honestly. You just know, don't start killing till 35 minutes in, and then only kill from then on, and just delight in each of the kills. And then everyone in your team will be on the same page about what should be happening when, and you don't need those sort of finer instincts.
Yeah, I totally agree that the improv structure we outline is a good basic structure for how to do it for the first time, because this is what we did for the first time when we were trying to figure out how to do this format, and it worked for us.
So that's that's all the reverse engineering we need to do, right, Julian? You got any other cookies on your plate?
No cookies, but just on the flip side, I think that there's so much to discover if you keep iterating on this format, and talking about it gets me so interested in iterating more on it. Especially our conversation today might be the biggest nugget of, oh, how do we do these big prolonged slasher
Mhm.
protag interaction scenes? And it's just like an actual slasher. There's going to be a million sequels of this thing because somehow you just want to keep seeing these people die.
I was really excited to do this on the podcast, partly because I had a feeling I hadn't seen any of these movies. And I had a feeling, based on what I learned from watching a bunch of Shakespeare comedies and breaking them down, that we could learn a lot. And
Yeah.
I'm excited to, I think for our runs this time, we might do one run in the way that we kind of are used to, and then one that's more experimental where we try out. Uh, this movie structure because I think it's totally improvisable and
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
It's so fun. It's got such a different texture compared to a lot of other improv.
um,
I'm super excited.
and if you don't want to do a slasher movie, take this and reverse engineer a different genre.
Right.
Maybe you're doing a rom com and your heat map is kisses.
Right. Yeah, no, literally. Like there's for a lot of genres, there's some central thing that is like the meat of it. Like sports movies, it's like the games or whatever. Rom-coms, it's like the romance. Like find whatever maybe one of the central motivating factors is, watch a bunch of things from that genre, map out when these things happen. Because I mean, timing is most everything, I feel like, in improv. Like
Mhm.
in at least back constructing these like genre inspired improvised formats.
Yeah. Because what structure is like, yeah, is pacing. And it just turns out that a lot of these have the structure where all the kills are densely clustered in the center or where they're evenly spaced. There was not a single show really where it was like even, dense, even, like, yeah, I don't know. It seemed that those were the two divergent things. And, we hypothesis test things. So watch 4, make your theory, and then watch 2 more to check to see if it's true.
Yeah.
All right. Then, without further ado, this has been Muprov.
Musings.
So, my sign off is that I have had a very slasher week. I think you'll appreciate this. Um, First thing that happened in my slasher, my little, it was really a 24 hours of slasher, was I got onto the subway train
Oh
and there
no.
was a man with a knife and a bunch of what looked like the mild salsa at Chipotle mixed with kind of tomatoes, and he was just slicing like a sharp knife was just slicing tomatoes onto the floor of the subway. Uh, it was spooky. I just
Yeah.
moved as far away as I could and then switched cars.
That's
Um,
slasher. That's Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
yeah, that was on my way to practice. And then on my way back from practice, also in the subway, a guy just started chasing me.
Oh. And
Uh,
how did that resolve?
it was in very slasher form, kind of like Mrs. Voorhees, where he was not that agile or like he was kind of lumbering. He was clearly on some sort of drug and he was yelling at me and chasing me. But I just sort of picked up my pace to kind of a quick walk and was like, sorry, I got to go. Sorry, I got to go. And he kept on running after. And then I eventually sort of, full on was sort of running away from him. But
Yeah.
there was no chance of him catching up to me.
Yeah.
I did the preschool thing where I put a garbage can in between me and him and we went around the garbage can once. And it's like, no, can't catch me, can't catch me. But it was pretty freaky. And then the final and third beat of the slasher thing, which is the funny beat. And Julian can see that my hand is currently in a
Yeah.
brace. I look like I've been injured, which is a classic slasher movie result. Um, I've also been starting a LLC for my improv ventures so that I won't be liable if someone gets injured at this festival that I ran last year or whatnot. Been calling bank people, trying to open up an account for it and stuff like that. And I was walking my little puppy who's been on these sign-offs before and has full of mischief right as I was talking to someone from the bank, and the phone was in my left hand. My right hand had the leash. The puppy poops outside, which she never does. She always poops on like a little mat inside. And I was trying to open this bag, which, was from our last dog, and like, was kind of hard to open. It had been around for a while, and I sort of got it open, but I was sort of messing around. The leash was getting a little untangled while I did that, and I bent over, and right as I was picking up the poop and talking to this person from the bank, she took off, just like at a full run, and it jerked my hand around, and she broke free on the leash and was running away, and I leapt, and my foot landed on the leash, and she was stuck for a second. And then my momentum kind of carried me, and she got out again in a very slasher way. And I dove to try to grab the leash, and basically my hand just fully impacted the ground because my feet weren't under me, and I was just in a ton of pain. And then I was like, stop! And it's just some people on the street kind of jumped in front of her, and then I stood up one more time, even though my hand felt like it was like broken. And I stepped on the leash one more time and put her in the bag. But what was so slasher about this was that the person who I'm on the phone with from the bank, what they heard is like, we're talking. And then suddenly like, oh, fuck, get her. Ouch. Oh no. Get in the bag. Oh, fuck. I'm sorry. I can't talk anymore. I'm in so much pain. I'm sorry. I will call you back. I'm sorry. Ouch. And then I just hung up.
Wow, you're the slasher.
Yeah.
You did that.
I'm the slasher, but I didn't really explain what happened. I was just like, I am in so much pain. I think I broke my hand, and then I spent the rest of the day in like the ER, or not the ER, the urgent care. Big difference.
What's the verdict on your guy?
I'm getting a verdict tomorrow. Unfortunately, no verdict yet.
Okay,
but it's not. There's not a break, so it's probably a sprain or a torn ligament, and I'm going into another docky tomorrow. But it really hurts and it's swollen.
Wow, that's a crazy sequence of events, and a hilarious final beat there. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So if Mu Improvisations gets started as an LLC, it's by hook or by crook.
Well, I think that I don't know how we're gonna do our next improv format, which is improvised or rock paper scissors. No! I guess I'll do it myself. I'm your only host.
Rock, paper, scissors, rock. Rock, paper, scissors, rock. One of my co-counselors that I used to work with, who was really, really annoying and hard to work with, and actually eventually got fired for hitting on one of the campers. So I have no remorse about doing this to him. Bad guy, but he always threw rock. And I figured this out and told all of the other counselors in our bunk. And then whenever we had to decide who would do something that we didn't want to do, we would do rock, paper, scissors.
That's great. That's thinking smarter, not harder.
It was so funny. I mean, it went right up until he got fired, where we never had to do anything that was bad because he did it every time.
You get one more chance to work at this camp if you can win at rock, paper, scissors. That's crazy.
Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Everything is changing. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now?